I'm going to ask you to consider some ideas today that will probably initially strike you as being unworkable, possibly even un-American, and absolutely anti-capitalist. So I'm going to ask you for the favor of your attention for a few minutes, even when you might be inclined to tune me out. Not going to shock you initially. In fact, I'm going to try very hard to just sneak up on you through historical illustrations. The first is that the idea of the Transcontinental Railroad was first proposed in Congress in 1845, but it wasn't considered practical or possible at that time. But 2 years into the Civil War, an amazingly strange time to propose any kind of major infrastructure project, President Lincoln signed the act that engaged two competing railroad companies, one starting in the west and going east, one starting in the east and going west. The rivals were richly rewarded for every mile of track that they were able to lay down. So no firm point of meeting was established initially. They were incentivized to move as fast as possible so that they would make more money for building more miles of track. Prior to constructing the railroad, it was not only time-consuming and very dangerous to try to travel from west to east or east to west. It would cost a person about $1,000 to make that trip, even in 1860. But when the railroad was finished, that passage could be accomplished in a few days at a cost of about $150. The project created jobs, especially for Civil War veterans. It created businesses and commerce and was responsible for the growth of cities and towns from coast to coast. It was expensive to build, and it became an opportunity for all kinds of crime and exploitation, especially of Chinese labor. And it inspired the opening of a lot of casinos and brothels right here in Springfield, Missouri, right along Commercial Street near the railroad tracks. But in the end, the Transcontinental Railroad helped to save the Union, and it brought the United States into the modern era. It had seemed like an impossible idea, but once we decided to do it, we accomplished the impossible, and the benefits of it changed America. In another example of Americans doing the impossible, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, American manufacturing was making cars, making toys, making home appliances. But within a month of that surprise attack, President Roosevelt established the War Production Board, which was tasked with taking over American manufacturing plants and raising raw materials, rationing food, rationing lots of petroleum and oil products so that we could produce the things that were needed for the war effort. There wasn't time to build entirely new and different manufacturing facilities, and we couldn't produce those consumable goods while making guns, uniforms, airplanes, tanks, ships, and feeding armies and navies. It was expensive, and almost everyone in the country had to sacrifice a lot of their comforts and their consumables. But we not only provided the major military force to win the war against fascism, but almost every field of science, of manufacturing, of medicine, went into rapid evolution, faster than had ever been seen before in any time in history. Of course, such an effort changed the workplace. It changed the workforce. Women were brought into manufacturing and never left. It changed the sociology of the country because people moved around, moved away from family farms and familiar towns and villages, and moved and made America what it is. After the war, years of suppressed consumer demands, along with advances in the manufacture and technology of the automobile, there was almost immediately a boom in the popularity of cars, and people started to transition away from train travel towards the family vehicle. 1956 is famous partially because I was born in August of that year, but even more, admittedly, earlier that summer, President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act that began construction of our interstate highway system. It was a jobs bill, to be sure, but Eisenhower also wanted to make automobile travel safer, faster, and it had the added benefit, he thought, of making it possible to evacuate major cities faster in case of a nuclear war. Eisenhower kind of thought that way. Even the remnant of my own family's pre-Civil War plantation was eventually divided into 3 parcels of land by the construction of interstate highways through Kentucky. My family didn't want it. They didn't want to give up the land. Each of the 3 parcels of land was then too small for a family to make a living on. But to build an interstate highway system, you have to be able to take people's land at what it was judged to be a fair price, whether it was or not, because it was for the public good. You have to make a decision. If you're going to build a railroad across the country, you're going to end up taking land that people were using for something else. In each of these 3 examples, the normal rules and laws about property ownership, about commerce, even self-determination, they were suspended, at least for a time, in order to serve the larger good of the nation, and in many ways, the larger good of the whole world. The Transcontinental Railroad, the wartime manufacturing necessary to win World War II, and the construction of the interstate highway system could not have been accomplished if we had simply left it up to market forces to make these things happen. You cannot accomplish the seemingly impossible simply by employing normal skills and habits. I hope that's obvious to all of us. Major world-changing, technology-improving, and global economy-stimulating accomplishments call for the suspension of the status quo in order to achieve this kind of transformation. Now, last month, I promised you a bit of a rant about how the world was finding it difficult to wean itself off of Russian oil and natural gas. The Russian economy, and hence its ability to conduct war against her neighbors, is dependent upon the income from the sale of oil and gas. You may think that vodka and caviar are the big Russian products, but that economically is a drop in the bucket. The late Senator John McCain once said of Russia that it was nothing but a gas station with nuclear weapons. And honestly, in lots of ways, even though we hear in the media they talk about Vladimir Putin dreaming of reforming the Soviet Union, I don't think he's all that interested in that. Russia is no longer a big communist government trying to create equality and efficiency. It has become a kleptocracy in which Putin and just a handful of the kleptocrats that are necessary for Putin to maintain power and control of resources, they are together exploiting the natural resources of Russia to make themselves the most wealthy people in the world. In the early 1990s, there was a rush on college campuses to offer more courses in Russian. The Berlin Wall had fallen. People believed that Russia was going to be this whole new market and that business alliances would be formed and opportunities to make yourself rich in business in Russia was just around the corner. But Russians asserted so much government corruption during the period of perestroika that almost everyone gave up on ever trying to start a business in Russia. The wealth was swept up by a few oligarchs, and that is right where it has stayed ever since. And since the invasion of Ukraine, even companies like McDonald's and Starbucks have ceased operation in Russia. I really don't think there was any nefarious idealism guiding Putin's attempts at expansion. I think it was really much more simple. It was greed. And sadly, folks, Greed has staying power that idealism just doesn't have. We have to keep trying to instill idealism in spiritual communities to make people committed to higher values. But greed is a constant, and it feeds itself, and it just keeps going. Even though his invasion of the Ukraine has gone horribly, and it has cost Putin global credibility, as well as using up a lot of his military assets and lives, my fear is that all Putin has to do is just hang in there. Keep the conflict going, even if at a low ebb, until those of us in the United States and Great Britain and France, those in the West, just get tired of it. Our attention span is notoriously short, and we'll be distracted by an Amber Heard and Johnny Depp divorce in the media. And all Putin has to do is just wait it out. And through persistent terrorism over the next couple of years, he may very well be able to take the entire Ukraine. Even my typically erudite audience probably already has more opinions about whether it was Depp or Heard that pooped in the sheets than they actually know about the oil pipelines in Europe, and which nations are the most dependent on Russian oil and why. You look back on the last century, and it becomes clear that we really never should have given up on trains and other forms of mass transit. Our love affair with automobiles has been disastrous for the environment, and it's been bad for most families' personal economy. But you cannot change the nature of transportation, as well as home heating, all at once. We have known for 2 generations that we needed to start using less fossil fuels and to develop better, more efficient, and more affordable forms of renewable energy. But we have moved in that direction only at a snail's pace. The money, and therefore the political influence, has been in oil, gasoline, natural gas, and to a certain extent, even coal. And so big corporations, with their puppet strings tied to the governments of the world, have managed to control the evolution of energy technology so that the demand for energy keeps going up, but the ways of getting that energy remain with coal, gas, fossil fuels. In the 1970s, President Jimmy Carter had solar panels installed on the roof of the White House. They were not great solar panels. They were not much help, but they were a symbol. They were a gesture towards the future. They were an honest and much-needed lesson to tell Americans that one day we're going to run out of oil and coal if it doesn't kill us first. We need to harness the power of the sun. When Ronald Reagan took office in 1981, he had those solar panels taken down from the White House, and an awful lot of his supporters cheered that move as if giving the finger would suddenly increase the supply of oil. It doesn't. Denying reality never helps. 40 years later, Donald Trump promised to restore coal mining jobs and promised to resist all changes towards renewable energy. Trump reminds me of that saying from C.S. Lewis, who said that a madman cannot put out the light of the sun by writing the word darkness on his cell walls. But a large portion of the American public believes that if we simply refuse to go to solar and wind power, that our petroleum and coal will last forever and it won't really hurt us. Now the slow advance of technology has caught up to us. Solar power is cheaper than oil and gas-produced power, and ironically, these new electric trucks that Ford is rolling out, they are faster and they have more towing power than their gas and diesel forebears. The problem is we have not made this transition a priority. We've slow-walked an evolution that is primarily needed to save the planet. And we have delayed the cost of savings of harvesting the energy that just falls from the sky for free every single day. Now we realize that virtually all terrorism, what led to 9/11, to the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, as well as Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, all of that comes from oil and gas money. If we paid attention to what Carter was trying to tell us more than 40 years ago, the capture of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran might have been the last act of terrorism we would have had to have faced. Every time that you and I pull up to a gas station to fill the tank of our SUVs, we are sending money to fund terrorist states. Sure, some oil comes from the United States, some from Canada, some from other allies, but the oil market is one big pot, so that any of us who are burning oil, whether it came from Oklahoma or Iran, it doesn't matter because it supports the oil industry. It supports the energy market. And through that energy market, we are transferring trillions of dollars to fund terrorism. We can't just change all at once. We can't change fast enough to make the Russian armies leave the Ukraine in the next month or two. But as sure as I'm standing here, before my daughter puts me in a nursing home, I will be getting around town in a self-driving electric car, one that won't even talk back to me and try to tell me that I don't need to go to Andy's for another ice cream again this evening. The question is, will that self-driving car be taking me for my pecan fudge sundae in 5 years or in 15 years? How much longer are we willing to send trillions of dollars from Western democracies to terrorist states every year? Should we slow walk it over the next 15 or 20 years? Or should we go into a wartime footing, just like we did when we needed to build tanks and airplanes to win World War II? What if we went into a wartime footing building wind turbines, solar farms, and the necessary infrastructure to transfer electricity around the country? What if we did it in 4 years or 5 years? If we use the kind of energy we used to win World War II, or to build the interstate highway system or the Transcontinental Railroad, we could have it done quickly. But consider the alternative. What will Russia do over the next decade if we keep giving them trillions of dollars a year for their oil and gas? What would it take for us to get this transformation done in the next 4 or 5 years? It could be done, and it wouldn't even be hard. We could harvest enough sunlight in Arizona and enough wind energy in Kansas and Oklahoma to power the entire nation. We just have to build the infrastructure to capture the energy and then the transfer lines to move the electricity. As soon as we have done this, within the first year or two, it will start saving American households about $5,000 a year in energy costs. Why haven't we done it? How can we break the political influence of the energy industry to do what we need to do, both to stop funding terrorist states and to save our planet from global climate collapse? Well, my friends, it is simple. All we have to do is nationalize the energy corporations, the oil and the gas. And I know that sounds like socialism, or as Fox News viewers would say, it sounds like communism, since they don't know the difference. But the United States has a long history of nationalizing industries that have actively worked against the common good of the nation. Joe Biden proposed an infrastructure bill aimed at greening the economy, which would have taken us a long way in the direction of renewable energy, but every single Republican in the Senate voted against it, along with the allegedly Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who, by the way, if you don't know it, You look at those 100 senators, which one gets the most political donations from the energy industry? It's Joe Manchin. And that is nothing. It's $400,000 last year, but that's nothing compared to how much money he makes from his ownership of coal companies. His vote is bought and paid for. Folks, Russia may not be the only kleptocracy in the world. We may see that the American government is rapidly going in that direction, and you need look no further than Joe Manchin to see the example. We have to see this issue as a crisis that is every bit as big as the Civil War or World War II, a crisis of preventing destruction of the environment and a crisis of ending future terrorism and illegal wars. During World War I, President Woodrow Wilson, in order to support the war effort, nationalized all of our railroads, our phone companies, our telegraph companies. He also nationalized all of our radio stations. Now, they were given back after the war, but they were operated by the federal government during the war. During World War II, President Roosevelt nationalized the airplane manufacturing companies, gun manufacturers. He nationalized more than 3,000 mines, along with the railroads and a number of oil companies, in order to win the war. Richard Nixon created Amtrak by nationalizing several failing passenger rail companies. After 9/11, President George W. Bush nationalized airline security, creating the TSA, which we all still hate today. He didn't even bother buying up the small existing security businesses in all the airports in the United States. He just shut them down without paying them a dime because it was in our national interest to have a uniform standard for airport security. In 2008, with the economic crash, Bush nationalized Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to stabilize the housing industry because it was in the interest of all Americans. We could, right now, for less money than Trump gave away in his tax cut for billionaires, we could buy up all of America's oil industry and start to manage them in a way that would reduce fossil fuels being burned and invest more and more in energy sources that are sustainable, so that in just a few years, any one of us could literally go to bed in our car after telling our car to take us to the beach in Florida. And you could wake up the next day and walk out onto the white sand beaches of the redneck Riviera. You might even enjoy a little Russian vodka or Russian caviar because Russia won't have a market anymore for their oil, their gas, or their coal. We can do it. And what is better, we can do it without a single Republican vote. Now, I don't know if Joe Biden has the political courage to do it, but I can tell you this much. That's exactly what I would do. And that's probably why you should have elected me president in 2020.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.